All right, girls, if you haven't had a chance to start test number 10 with the science reasoning, that's fine. We talked about how, it can be intimidating. So I wanted to go over 3 recommendations for what to do on the science reasoning test. And me and Clayton, we found that these recommendations worked very well for him when he has very limited scientific vocabulary. He did pretty well on the science reasoning test after going over these 3 things. So, what are they? Well, number one, you want to save the scientist comparison passage for last. Okay. Whenever you take this ACT, you're going to have one passage in the science section where it has scientist 1 versus scientist 2. So you want to do the scientist 1 versus scientist 2 last. All right. So let me go ahead and put that on the screen. Recommendation number 1. It's called the conflicting passage, which is scientist number 1 versus scientist number 2. Scientist number 2. Save that for last. All right. Now, don't get this confused for experiment 1 and experiment 2. Okay. This is scientist conflicting opinions. All right. So do that last. Okay. What's the second thing you should do? Well, if you're not going to do this one first, let's go look at another one. All right. Here's passage 2. And as I look, there's some data. All right. That's where you're going to focus first. So the second step after you skip the conflicting scientist step is identify the data. Okay. What are they measuring? Right? What's being measured? Are they measuring? Oh, okay, here they have a zone and they have radon levels, a zone and radon levels. Okay, that's what's being measured. This is a rather simple passage. So before we go on to number 3, oops, let's do this. Let's keep number 2 on there. All right. Let's go to a slightly more detailed passage with more data. Okay, so here's a table 1 and a figure 1. Table 1 and figure 1. So here I can use table 1, which they're measuring predators. Here they're listing the predators, and they've got characteristics and examples. Okay, predators and characteristics, examples. And then down here, what's the data being measured? Prey population, time in years. Prey and time. Predator, prey, time. Predator, prey, time. Now that brings me to number 3. Step number 3 is I want to have a general idea. So get general idea of the experiment. Okay, what were they experimenting with here? Oh, the last one was they were measuring zones and radon levels. Okay, here they're measuring predators, prey over time. That brings us to number 4. I'm sorry, I told you 3. There's 4 things you want to do. The first is skip the scientist comparison. Number 2, look at the data, what's being measured. Number 3, get a general idea of what's going on in the experiment. And that leads us to 4, start to pre-read questions and their answer choices. Pre-read questions and answer choices. If you only pre-read the question, you may not have a good eye for what you're looking for in the passage. Okay. Then finally, if you wanted to add a step 5, finally, you would then go look in the passage. Notice I didn't say read the passage, right? I don't want you to read it from start to finish. It's just like math, but you do have to read a little bit more carefully with the science passages. You have to read full sentences. But again, you want to kind of look around. All right. So remember those things. Let's go back and say, all right, number 1, we're going to skip scientist 1 versus scientist 2. We're going to do that last. Number 2, I'm going to look at the data. Here I'm looking at different kinds of weathering, right? And what's the mechanism? What's doing the weathering? What's the result? Okay, so I'm measuring weathering and what kind of weathering, who's doing the weathering, and what the result is. Okay, so we're measuring how it looks like here, how rocks are being broken apart. All right. Then that brings us to number 3. Well, 3 is like looking at the general idea. weathering and how, how it's done on the rocks. Brings us to 4, I start to pre-read, okay? So if I'm pre-reading this question, right, I'm looking for where plants contribute to weathering. Where do plants contribute to weathering? So I'm going to start looking through here for plants, all right? And this jumps out at me. I say, okay, physical weathering. But be careful. Be careful. You don't want to just say, oh, okay, it's physical only. You got to keep looking, right? Keep looking. Look through the passage. Do you see anything about plants here? Plants, plants, plants. If you do a good look, take a look. And then you look here at the table and the data, but if you're not careful, you might miss something in the passage. So be careful, pre-read, look at the answer choices, physical, biological, and then look in your passage. Okay, so those are the things I want you to do. And if you do those things, the science reasoning looks a lot less intimidating. All right, look at the data. Well, first, skip scientist 1 versus scientist 2 for last. All right, after that, look at the data, what's being measured, get an idea of the experiment, what were they actually doing here. Number 4, start to pre-read, okay? Pre-read questions and answer choices. Answer choices will lead you to number 5, where you need to look in the passage. All right, guys? All right. I'll see you when I see you, and we'll be going over science reasoning next. And you'll find that you can pretty much slam dunk it. So I want this entire science reasoning from test 10 finished by the next time we meet. All right.